how do you know what you should have known versus what you shouldn't have known? So that's the question that we're going to get into in this conversation. So, mis and disinformation are protected by the First Amendment generally. That is there's a huge caveat there, generally. A government may not censor speech or ideas because it decides that information is not true. This all stems from a theory called the marketplace of ideas, meaning that everything, all speech, all ideas should have a place in society, whether they're true or not. And it is up to us to figure out and sift through information that we deem true and correct versus information that we do not. We don't want to live in a world where we don't want to live in a country where our government, where there's a lot of information that's floating around and our government gets to be the final decider of this is true, this is not true. And because this is not true, you no longer have access to it. There are countries that operate that way, and I'm so glad that ours is not one of them. Because it really does put the responsibility on us to be able to make this decision for ourselves. And it is so important to a society that kind of operates from a place of free speech. The downside of it, though, is that you do have inaccurate information floating around. And you do have to put in that extra work of deciding, okay, what's real, what's not, what outlets can I trust versus ones that I can't, who can be my go-to source for information, and I know that it's accurate, and I know that I can count on it. So it really kind of falls on a spectrum. You have, and it's all relative too, because what's true and accurate to some people may not be true and accurate to someone else, or that truthfulness and accuracy can look different depending on who you're talking to. So because of that, that is why it's so important that everything is able to be in the mix. Because what's true for me may not be true for you. And just because it's not true for you doesn't mean that it's wrong, and doesn't mean that it should be silenced or censored. We have, in recent years, seen disinformation and misinformation take off because of technology. So we now have artificial intelligence that's kind of coming in and making these waters even more muddy than they already were. There, of course, don't get me wrong, there are benefits to AI. AI can be very helpful. I do think that, using it in a safe way can be beneficial. But again, there is the flip side of that, and the ways that people are using AI to manipulate and mislead and intentionally confuse people. This is where we get into situations of what are called deep fakes, where there is content, video and photo content that is completely altered to completely represent something different. So, and I think, at least for me, deepfakes are hard to spot. I think that some people are better at spotting them than others. But to me, deepfakes are still pretty hard to decipher, because a deepfake video will literally look like it's real. The person will be speaking. Someone could take a deepfake of me right now and alter, because we are being recorded in this room. Someone could grab the video clip. They have my voice. They could completely change what I'm saying, how my mouth is moving, and it would look like I'm saying something completely different, knowing that we're here in this room and you all are hearing exactly what I'm saying. So deepfakes are concerning, and a lot of legislatures across the country, state legislatures, have expressed their concern about deepfakes and the influx of AI and different AI tools with misinformation or disinformation. And we will talk about Georgia's interaction with deepfakes here in a few minutes. But generally, what we say is the best way to combat misinformation and disinformation is with facts. Again, everything has to be in the mix. Everything has to be put into play. And we just have the hope and the confidence that what is true for some, truth is personal, and you will find information that is true to you and for you. Anyone have any questions so far? Okay.
I thought we got two different types of facts now. I might have a fact, and he might have a whole different facts. We both say what we say are facts.
That's right.
That's a problem.
But it's okay. How is it a problem?
Because if we can't agree on what facts are, how can we agree on anything? It's a problem.
I think that's a great point, and I think that is the goal of the First Amendment. The First Amendment in our expression isn't necessarily about agreeing. So while, like you said, you may have a fact and you're like, no, this is what it is, and Andres may have a fact and he's like, no, this is what it is, just because it doesn't make it any different for you versus for him. Your truth is your truth, your fact is your fact, his fact is his fact. Now, that it does present complications because in the context of having to make decisions, having to have literally people's lives and livelihoods on the line based on hinging on what's fact and what's not, it gets tricky. An example that is controversial, but is one that is very prevalent right now, especially in the election season, is, at what point does life begin? And some would say life begins at a certain point, and there are others who say that life begins at a completely different point. And both sides have their facts, right, to back up exactly what they're saying. So that's an example that I think of where it really is tricky. And the contention between deciding those two facts lands a group of people right in the middle that, at the end of the day, this person might not want to proceed with their current situation. And their ability to proceed with that situation or not is dependent on which side's facts actually prevail.
Yeah, because it's kind of hard to compromise when you don't even agree on the facts.
Exactly.
It's kind of hard.
Right, but also something that I like to remind people that this is not new. Like, our country has operated this way since the beginning of our country. So it's now, things are very heated, things are very divided. But this is how our country was designed to operate. That's why when we have the marketplace of ideas theory, which is literally like, so I was a communications major in undergrad, and my communications degree was very different because I didn't do like mass media courses and like journalism and things like that. Like, I actually learned the theory behind communication. So I was, reading the origins of all of the Greek philosophers and how they were in the town square having these long, illustrious debates, right? And that is when the founding fathers were here in America and they were drafting our Constitution and drafting our Bill of Rights and thinking about the First Amendment and our ability to express ourselves. Those were the figures that they were referencing. Those were the times that they were referencing, going back to, the town square. And anyone who's coming to the town square to have a discussion or to have a debate, I won't say anyone, of course there were parameters to that, but those who fell within the parameters of who were able to go and speak in the town square, all of their ideas, they could contribute their ideas. And so it then became a marketplace of ideas. You have this person who believes this. You have this person who believes that. And then the hard work is finding, okay, how do we balance everyone's ideas and make our society one where we can all live in harmony with the decisions that we make. That's the part where I think that we are failing. So having a difference in opinion, having a difference of fact is not new. But where our country is struggling right now, in my own personal opinion, is the ability to come to a harmonious decision about, how we move forward with the differing sides that have differing facts.
The failure to objective truths. I feel like the example that you brought up is a really good example of objective truths. truth, like that can both be valid, but especially since we're going on the idea of like politicians, the first place my mind went was like the way some politicians are talking about crime rates.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't say,
Right.
oh yeah, like crime is like the worst it's ever been, and then you have OJ like, actually crime is down 20%.
Right.
So it's like, I guess I definitely understand what you're saying, where you're like, we've always operated this way and everything like that. And I definitely agree that I think the way we have access to so much information is definitely changing it, because I feel like more different false truths could hit a stopping point. Because after it hit too many people, like it would just hit a dead end. Or people would be like, wait, that's actually not true.
Mm-hmm.
But like even kind of like how you were saying now with the technological advancements, it's getting not what's an objective truth and what's an objective truth, but which objective truths are actually objective. Voting sources that get spread so quickly.
Yeah.
And the difference, because on the internet everything looks the same, you know.
That is very true. I mean, even just now, so there's been so much misinformation and disinformation this election season. Even recently with the recent headlines about why FEMA no longer has funding.
Yeah.
That is one side's argument is objectively false. Like, it is not true. And another issue I think that we're facing right now is the disinformation part, which, you know, here, I'll go back. The disinformation is the deliberate misleading. So we have people who are very much intentionally trying to muddy the waters, trying to get people to believe something that they know is not true. And I think that has probably also been, you know, at play for a long time as well. That's not anything that's new, but there's just a different kind of there's a lot of gas behind it right now. And there are people who are attaching onto being deliberately misled. The misinformation, you know, in talking about the difference between these two, the misinformation, while it's concerning, is not the most sinister. The most sinister of these two is the disinformation.
Because doesn't the disinformation lead to misinformation? I mean, don't people usually get the disinformation and spread it? And
Well,
that's the misinformation, right?
Well, the disinformation is, again, deliberate. So if someone is spreading something and they don't know that...
No, what I'm saying is, the origin of the misinformation, isn't it disinformation?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And then there are some times when people really just don't have the right information and they believe that they do. And I think that that's something that we have to, if we're going to keep any hope alive in this country, we have to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt, and we have to try and see the difference between those who are deliberately misleading and those who are just misled. So that's something that I see a lot. So part of my work is to go to the state capitol during legislative session here in Georgia between January and March. So I have a lot of interaction with our state legislators, and as do a lot of people in our office and a lot of people within our partner organizations. And one of the things that we catch on to very quickly are the legislators who are there, who are just misinformed or have personal beliefs that aren't necessarily sinister and don't come from a malicious place, but they're not necessarily in line with what the ACLU of Georgia believes and advocates for. Those conversations are easier to have. Then you have the legislators who are set, who know what they're doing is wrong, know that their facts are not backed by anything, and they are set on advancing those falsities. Exactly. And that's what's harder to work with. And those are the legislators that tend to not want to speak to us. Those are the legislators who tend to kind of turn the other way when they see us walking the halls in the Gold Dome. So there's very much a difference. And I always encourage anybody who can to come to the Capitol and talk with the legislators, because, you know, even as individual citizens, it's very easy to tell the difference once you get in there and start having conversations. So Sir,
You said if you can have it.
if you can have a conversation, but everyone is not intentionally misleading. Some people are just, spreading what they heard. Again, like a rumor mill. But to your point, there are people who are very much being intentional about lying. That's really the only way to put it. Lying. And knowing that they're lying. But, again, most of it generally is constitutional and protected by the First Amendment. But we'll get into some nuance here. So, generally the ACLU takes a position, again, that misinformation and disinformation is constitutional. However, we do have some lines that we draw. So, within the elections, there's different types of misinformation and disinformation going around. So you can have some misinformation about a candidate, what their background is, what their position is on an issue, whether they went to Harvard or Princeton, things like that, things that that can be inconsequential. We're not too worried about that. We think that that's part of the marketplace of ideas theory, and generally should be allowed in the mix. What we have an issue with is misinformation that goes around that provides false information about the voting process. So this looks like wrong, or false information about your voter registration deadlines, or your poll location, or your poll hours, or whether you're able to submit an absentee ballot or not. These are the issues that we are most concerned about, because to us, in our view, this kind of crosses the line and goes over into voter intimidation, in real attempts to try and disenfranchise and get people to not vote. We also pay attention to this with regard to where the information is coming from, whether it's a single individual or whether there's an organization or a group of people who are backing the information that's going out. So, again, if there is an organization or a group of people who are saying Election Day is November 8th, we're going to be very concerned about that. Because Election Day is not November 8th. and that is a fact. That is a provable fact. Election Day is not November 8th. And so if there are a group of people, an organized group of people going forth and putting this information out there, as the ACLU, we're going to take issue with that. And that crosses the line into territory that we believe violates other constitutional rights. If there's one person saying Election Day is November 8th, we're not going to be as concerned about that, because the reach of that person probably isn't going to be very much compared to that of a group. Depending. Exactly. You're right. Platform and the ability to reach a number of people is definitely a consideration. So, but generally, if I were to tell people, Election Day is November 8th, probably, nobody would really care. But yeah, so this is where the ACLU finds a lot of concern, is just making sure that the information that is going out is not intended to mislead people about their access to voting. What you want to believe about the candidates, the information that you receive about the candidates, that generally that is what it is. You do your research and find out if what you just read or what you just saw is actual fact. There's a lot of candidate information that's floating around that is disinformation and that is misinformation. But again, that is par for the course when it comes to election cycles and people running for office. There's a lot of mistruths that go out, and If those candidates want to pursue some type of recourse, they can. But it is not up to the government to be able to say, no, that information is wrong, so exclude it.
Okay. If I'm in the theater and I shot fire,
Right?
there's no fire.
Right.
It's going to give me a consequence. Can the person sitting next to me give me a consequence?
No.
So whose responsibility is to give me?
The government. And I thank you so much for that. That is a great question. And that is a great point. So that is the difference. The First Amendment is our right to express ourselves, generally, is a right that the courts and that our government wants to regulate the least. But there are parameters around those regulations. So, like you said, screaming fire in a theater is something that our Supreme Court has already said, no, you can't do that, because there's an inherent danger that's associated with that, an inherent and a direct and immediate danger that is associated with that. If you're in a theater and you scream fire, nobody's going to stay calm. Everybody's going to get up and run and scream, and people could get hurt in the process because you have now said something that's not true.
Wouldn't that same thing apply if I'm the president and I tell a bunch of people to go to the Capitol? Wouldn't that same thing, based on what we want to call it, I don't know if you want to call it misinformation or disinformation, because I think he knew, so it's disinformation. So isn't that a perfect case?
The ACLU of Georgia is a nonpartisan organization.
Okay, all right, never mind.
We can talk after this session, but the ACLU of Georgia is a nonpartisan organization. The inciting of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has ruled that the incitement of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. Who that applies to is a different conversation. Anyways, great question though, because that is the standard that is supposed to be upheld. That's the standard that's supposed to be upheld. But again, you can see the difference though in screaming fire in a theater versus saying, forgive me, but Haitian Americans eat pets. Like, no one's gonna jump up and start screaming and be trampled out of a building because of this information.
But there is a consequence. There has been a negative consequence.
Right. Yes. But that's the thing though. Our speech and the things that we say, there's always going to be a consequence to it. There's a consequence to everything.
True, but
so, right. And yes, the intensity of that consequence varies, right? But that again is the First Amendment protection that we have, because think of it in reverse, right? Think if you say something offensive. So this is where we get with the First Amendment. This is where you get into offensive speech. Offensive speech and hate speech are technically protected by the First Amendment. So and I'll just be real. You and I assume you identify as a Black American, right? Someone saying the N-word, right, to you may be very offensive, may be very hurtful. And, I feel the same way, right? But you can't, under the First Amendment, because of our First Amendment protections, just because something is offensive and hurtful doesn't mean that a person should be punished for it, or that the government can then say, well, you can't say that. We can't have a law say, the government can't say, no one can say the N-word, because then you'd have to apply that to everything that anybody could remotely deem offensive.
I understand that, but that's different than somebody saying something that actually causes actual harm to another person.
Oh, okay. Oh, did you flag me? Did you flag me?
I was about to.
Oh, sorry. I was like, I didn't know.
No. The other one just ended earlier.
Oh.
People were moving around.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
You have a few more moments.
Okay.
I didn't
Cool.
want to scare you.
I was like, dang.
No, you technically have 4 minutes.
Okay. No, okay. We're having a good conversation. So, yeah. So again, so.
Because all apply to it 10 minutes left,
Mhm.
but if they end it early, then.
Oh, yeah. Hi, welcome. We're talking about misinformation and disinformation. So yes, that allegation is hurtful, right? And there have been consequences to it, right? For the people that the allegation is about. And I think that the people in Ohio, in that community, are actually pursuing some type of litigation, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, they are?
I think so.
Okay, 'cause I haven't heard it.
I think that I'm almost positive that they are.
I heard that they asked him to stop.
Right.
I heard that.
Right.
But I didn't hear it.
Yeah, I think that they filed suit, I don't know against who, but under like some type of discrimination
It
ground.
wouldn't be under this? Or it's a state legislation?
Well, but again, it applies federally as well.
They got a federal law basically says the same thing.
Yeah, it applies federally, but again, they probably, and I think this is a good example because they probably would not have any First Amendment grounds, honestly, because again, it would be considered more than likely. Now, I'm not a court, and I'm not a judge, but I would imagine that a court would say that that allegation is offensive.
Right.
There's not anyone that, to our knowledge, has been physically harmed
Right.
as a result of that allegation. There's not anyone that has, there was no violence that was incited by that allegation, physical violence. So, I think that one, in terms of First Amendment, would be tough. Now, because, like I said, I think that they are suing under some type of discrimination grounds because of the basis of it being very targeted to Haitian people specifically. But, yeah.
We don't want to wait till somebody actually gets hurt before somebody actually do something. That's what I'm saying when it comes to the government acting on any legislator.
That's actually the
Law
standard.
Can stop him. Is there one that can stop them from doing this?
No, so that is actually the standard that our court system operates by. Someone has to experience a harm before you can pursue any type of litigation. So, right. You can't say, "Oh, I'm going to sue because this has I could get hurt from this in the future." There has to actually be a harm that results.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in terms of the stuff with January 6th, and understanding that communication works two ways, it's the sending of a message but the receiving. The message is carefully crafted in a way that is not to incite something, right? So I believe he told them let's go down to the Capitol and protest this peacefully or whatever his words were, right? It doesn't necessarily, his message inherently might not incite the violence, but if the received message or the underlying message there does result in an action like that, would someone, obviously not him, be held accountable for something like that? So if I was saying hey, oftentimes, what is this, the streamer invited a bunch of people out to New York, maybe 10 people got killed or something like that.
Yeah.
Where his intention wasn't to cause any, ever. But are you still, is the sender of the message responsible for the way that the message is?
So that's a great question, and a court is going to look at that on a case-by-case basis. So generally, I think the principle is that the speaker has to speak with the intent for whatever result occurs with the intent for that result to occur. However, if the circumstances are such that you say one thing, but
Let me give you an example.
the language is very coded
Example for that.
and loaded, and the people who are on the receiving end understand what the coded language is, or if there's circumstances to where there's no way that the speech would not incite violence, then that's a different type of situation.
I hear what you're saying about it, but it would be a case based on each individual case.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking in the situation you just named, you just gave a message and you said go somewhere peacefully. But prior to you saying that, if the crowd is shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," Vice President Pence, they're shouting that, and while they're shouting that, you say after that what you just said, go to the Capitol. Does that mean now that you are exciting something, or you are conscious and aware of what you're doing? I mean, on a case-by-case basis, wouldn't the court look at you and say, well, you knew that what they were going to do when they got down there, because you said that?
So this is something.
And you didn't have to say it.
Right, but so in a First Amendment, and as a First Amendment advocate, that is something that I would be very, very concerned about. So there actually is a case in the Fifth Circuit with this exact issue. So I don't know if you are familiar with the activist DeRay McKesson. He's a fairly young African American man that is a activist, a lot of followers on social media, and there was a protest that he was involved in, I think in New Orleans, and I think he was putting it on through his organization, and the protest ended up not being peaceful. And so the local government wanted to hold him responsible for all of the disruption that ensued because he was the organizer of this protest. He defended himself on First Amendment grounds and says, just because I organized this, just because I said to come here and we're going to protest this issue and, we're going to have a conversation about this or whatever, doesn't mean that I am then responsible for everything that happens after that. So, again, when we regulate something, especially on First Amendment grounds, we have to think about the way that it could be used against us later. So if we're talking about January 6th and we're saying, oh, well, he said this and he said that, and, that's essentially the same thing, the same defense that DeRay gave himself. He's like, I just said we're going to come here, we're going to have this protest. I just told them to come here so that we can protest this issue that's going on. I didn't say for them to do, X, Y, and Z. So it goes, these things go on both sides. And so if you say that, oh, well, they shouldn't be able to do it, that was inciting violence, then be careful and be mindful of that, because then that can be used against us in the same way. Okay. Right on time. So lastly, I was going to talk about our state legislation about disinformation. I'll just quickly go through it. This is about the deep fakes. Our state legislature tried to pass legislation saying that there would be a criminal penalty, so criminal charges, going to jail, or a fine, for sharing materially deceptive media about an election candidate within 90 days of an election. We went to the Capitol, we advocated against this bill because it was extremely vague. What is materially deceptive media? Why 90 days? What happens if materially deceptive media comes across your news feed or your timeline, you don't know that it's materially deceptive, and you reshare it? Are you now subject to criminal penalty as well? So these were all the questions, a lot of the questions that we brought to the legislature when they tried to pass this bill. We also made a point to them that sometimes materially deceptive media is protected satire or comedy, or people making skits about different candidates, and then sharing that, creating that and or sharing that could potentially expose people to criminal penalty, literally just for making a little fun. So some things to think about as we break from this session. Have you ever shared deep fakes or altered media on your own social media pages? How do you know if you have or if you haven't? Have you been able to identify media that you've shared as altered? And then thinking about, the thing that we think about almost primarily with the First Amendment is the chilling effect of regulating the First Amendment. Meaning that if the regulation that the government imposes, will it silence me? If you shared content on social media, would you share content on social media if you knew there was a chance that you could face criminal penalty for what you shared? Even if you didn't create it. If you're just reposting, if you're liking, if you're sending it to someone in a personal message, would you still do those things if you knew there was a chance that you could face criminal penalties? Some things to think about. And if you did it, and if you wouldn't share it, that means your speech is being chilled.
That law is enforced by the state attorney.
It's not law. We block it.
Oh, y'all
Successfully
blocked it.
successfully didn't, or thankfully it didn't pass. So
But if it would have, that's who would have.
yes,
And even if it did pass, wouldn't the judge have to define what those parameters are? Wouldn't the judge have to do it since it's so vague? Wouldn't it be his responsibility to define what that meant?
essentially yes.
Yeah.
It would come down to a court having to say what that looks like.
Materially decided.
Right.
Is that standard defined in the? There you go. Someone's
Yep.
going to interpret that.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably the
Supreme
AG is
Court.
gonna-
Right.
The AG will interpret it first, and then they'll try that theory out with the judge, and then the judge will.
Exactly. And that's why when we went to them, we were like, what does that even mean? Like, what does that even mean? But also, again, you have the right, even if something is materially deceptive, however you want to define it, it's materially deceptive about a candidate, you have the right to do that. Now, if what you post is incorrect about the candidate, then the candidate can rightfully go after you and sue you for defamation or sue you for libel or whatever. But we already have law that covers that. So that legislation was very unnecessary. Glad that it did not pass, but we are expecting to see it again next session. So.